Okay, should we move on to another train wreck?
I mean, it does seem to be the theme of the show. So yes, let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Uber now. I know we're focusing really on the late stage. Uber is not even a private company at this point. They did go public this year, but a lot of the news out this week about Uber will impact the entire ecosystem. So we felt like it was pretty important that we at least touch on it. So I'm just going to start with news of layoffs at Uber. So yes, we recently did a report on some Uber layoffs, I believe in marketing, but there were another 435 employees that were let go announced this week at Uber. So that represents 8% of the company. So this is not some sort of like tiny blip on the radar. This is a pretty big deal. Uber is clearly restructuring and trying to figure out a way, I think, to make the company a bit more lean. It has grown to 27,000 full-time employees, in offices all around the world. So there's clearly an effort being made there to, I think under Dara to just sort of, I guess, eliminate the weak links or whatever it may be. So I don't know, Alex, do you have any thoughts on what this means for the company moving forward?
Well, to me, it shows an increased focus on cost cutting. And I think that's critical for the firm. I think I think everyone kind of agrees that their cost structure is unsustainable given the gross margin that their core business can generate. And the company has certainly been whacked recently for having a set of operating and net losses that, even with reasonable qualifications about share-based compensation and so forth, are too high to be sustainable as its growth has slowed. Second major round of layoffs, we saw them do other cost cutting like the balloon thing. So to me, it's good signals to Wall Street that this matters, that they do care about this and they are listening. I don't have enough context on exactly who was laid off to really kind of vet or gauge the quality of the decisions on an individual basis. Right. But certainly to me, as a cynical outside observer, this seems intelligent.
So just a couple more notes on that. There were of course, no drivers laid off, and there were no people within Uber Eats which were laid off, which makes a whole lot of sense because, as we've heard time and again, Uber Eats is the fastest growing business within Uber. So I think, if anything, they're only going to expand that team as they sort of cut down on these inefficient teams like marketing. And I'm not exactly sure, like you said, where the cuts were this week. But it was engineering and product teams. So we're seeing them cut across all teams at this point.
Well, what's really fascinating about that is that Uber is cutting in the most competitive part of its talent stack. Because if you want to hire engineers and product people, it's very competitive in Silicon Valley and even around the world. And so to see Uber decide to cut those roles, it implies that they're very serious about cost cutting. This is not a reduction of like interns.
Yes.
This is
Sorry, go ahead. Okay, yeah, I cut you off a little bit, but I agree, although I think so much of what Uber has built is so, they've become, in essence, like a pretty well-oiled machine. So I guess I can understand why some cuts in engineering might have been made. But otherwise, marketing is more of a puzzle to me because, of course, they still need to have these very strong marketing efforts. But I think my guess is that they were just these massive teams that were not working terribly well. And so they were able to cut back just because had it overgrown.
Yeah, I would add to that if you have 27,000 employees, you probably have some fat somewhere to cut. And so these are the first two decisions that make some sense. I can't hear Kate, I don't think.
Oh, okay. I was wondering
now I can. Sorry.
Oh, you looked confused, Alex. I was wondering what was going on. Are you okay? You look really confused. Can you hear me?
Well, I wasn't sure if you stopped talking before I didn't expect you to, or like what happened.
I kind of I interrupted you. So that was my bad.
No, you're fine. I feel like that fuck up is mine.
No, it was me. It was me. Don't take blame.
Where should we start?
I think the interruption is totally fine. Chris can decide, but
do you want to pivot to the letter?
I think
really
we should pivot. Yeah, but can you? Because I don't really know. Just you should lead that.
So
if you want to mention,
I'll pick up and pivot to the letter.
Yeah, and if you want to mention Mike's book, that's probably. It did just come out, so.
Okay, Chris, can I just start up? Can we do a cut like that'll work?
Yeah, you can just start up and I'll be able to cut you in
Okay,
there.
Kate, can you give me 3, 2, 1?
3, 2, 1.
Okay, Kate, have you read the Mike Isaac Super Pumped book yet?
I have started the book and I'm not done. I don't want any spoilers.
Okay, well, I'm 1 page in, so you're certainly ahead of me. I bring it up because there's a letter mentioned in the text. The book's called Super Pumped, by the way. Buy a copy, support your local journalists, please. That discusses that Travis was going to send this letter to the company, and then he was forced out before the letter was sent. And Gizmodo actually published it this week. And I thought it was interesting enough that I thought we should touch on it for a second. What's fascinating about the letter from the erstwhile Uber CEO Travis is that it shows some contrition And also critically, in my view, acknowledges some failures of the company's organizational structure to advance to the point that it could be as mature as it needed to be. And the two things that I wanted to point out from the note are that they discuss, quote, an avalanche of organizational debt. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the companies that we talk about on equity that are, probably Series C and beyond, that are raising large tranches of capital, large blocks of money, often scale their people very quickly. They hire a lot of folks because they have a lot of money to do that. One thing that comes with that is immaturity of business over stuff with people, and you have issues inside of your org about how teams work together, how HR functions. You can have a lot of key and core issues that can hurt your business long term. So to see Travis mention that, I thought was a useful admission of where the business was. Mm-hmm. Finally, every company has values, kind of a set of things they talk about. Like do good or whatever. Crunchbase has a couple of these. We put them on mugs. It's kind of fun. Uber had some that were notably potentially aggressive, like toe stepping and always be hustling and that sort of thing. And he laid out in this letter that some of those weren't working for the business. And so to me, this matters because if you go back in time, VCs and industry observers were saying, without Travis, there is no Uber. And I think what they meant was without the ethos that he brought to the business, there was going to be no Uber. But here is the guy who built the ethos saying it wasn't working anymore. So to me, this actually operates almost as an endorsement of Dara's CEO term, if you will. And I just recommend that everyone read it if you can. We'll put it in the show post if you want to find it on TechCrunch. It's a fascinating read. Yeah.
And I think, what you just mentioned, there, of course, Travis Kalanick, given that he was the founding CEO, had a huge impact on Uber and the culture that still exists there today. And despite the fact that Dara has made a lot of changes to sort of, get rid of some of the influence he's had, there's no changing the fact that so much of the company's core is a result of Kalanick's leadership. So anyway, moving forward to some other Uber news this week, there was a bill that was passed in the state of California. It's called AB5. And This bill is going to enforce companies that employ gig workers to classify them as employees rather than contractors. So of course, the first company you think of is Uber. This would mean that Uber drivers would be classified as employees in theory, and that would mean that they would be provided better compensation, better benefits, or benefits at all, and they could address and handle their taxes much easier. But Uber is saying that this actually doesn't apply to them at all because drivers are outside, quote, the course of Uber's usual business. So what that means is, sure, most Uber employees, they're not drivers. So Uber is saying, well, majority of our employees aren't drivers. So this isn't a bill that makes any sense to be applied to a company like ours. They think it should be applied to companies in which a majority of their usual business or a majority of their workers are actually gig workers.
I have thoughts about this, but I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to get part of this wrong. So please don't send me an email telling me that I hate capitalism. Just to be clear, I am a capitalist. I work for a company, et cetera. So that's my general perspective. But in my view, the value that Uber has created has been slightly misapportioned overall. And I think that the way the company currently operates doesn't afford enough economic benefit to the drivers. And that's predicated on my opinion of being an Uber user since 2011 and talking to drivers around the world while I've been in their cars. Uber's idea that they can avoid AB5 by claiming that the drivers are outside of the normal course of business, if it works, shows that the law was poorly drafted. Because obviously they didn't put this law in place and then expect Uber to wiggle out of it like this. And then finally, this has been kind of brought up before. There was a time this was an issue in New York. And so we actually have seen Uber defend this perspective before. And their argument, I'm going to kind of quote here from Uber at the time, was that it's the riders who need the drivers, not Uber. Uber is just a marketplace in between, which is doublespeak to me. Of course, Uber needs the drivers. They generate the revenue that Uber takes a cut of that powers their entire business. And so to me, it seems like a semantic argument trying to wiggle out of a moral requirement.
Yeah, I mean, it's really upsetting to see Uber try to bypass this new law, which was built to protect all of the thousands and thousands of workers across the state that are kind of being taken advantage of by this system. But the thing is that I mean, Uber, as we've talked about, is already losing billions of dollars. They're losing so much money, and a lot of that has to do with subsidizing rides. If they have to pay their drivers better and they have to give them benefits or whatever it may be, I mean, how detrimental, I guess, is that for Uber?
Well, how far can they cut their cost structure? I mean, we just discovered they have 435 people they didn't need in their engineering and product teams. That's a hell of a lot of cost. I mean, the argument, I think, Kate, is that there's two sides. One that I got on Twitter recently was that, if Uber has to do this and then they have to classify drivers as full-time or not, and then they can't hire as many drivers as they wanted, it's going to be, it's not a good situation. The flip side of it is maybe Uber doesn't work. That's a business. I mean, it's never, ever gotten close to viability. It's never become close to generating cash on a large basis compared with the numbers that we've seen. So if Uber needs 27,000 employees to operate a marketplace in which the drivers it claims are not even part of its core business, maybe it's not that great of a business. And that's not a popular point.
No, I mean, it's not a popular point because especially down here in quote unquote Silicon Valley, there are a lot of people who personally did invest in Uber and who are long on Uber because of that. And sure, whatever, I understand that. But I think what you just said about the fact that Uber has never been a viable business and Uber still loses a ton of money is kind of the narrative that I think should be pushed moving forward. I think there should be more on that. I know that Dara, like in response to Mike Isaac's book that we already talked about, has made a bunch of statements about how he's so excited about Uber and yes, it's great business and all these things, but we're not seeing any evidence of that. And the fact that they are so adamantly opposing AB5, which is really meant to support the people who work for them, I think just goes to show how afraid they are of these potentially of policy in the still nascent sector of ride hailing and gig economy, et cetera.
Yeah. And then as a last point to wrap this up so we can kind of move on, you mentioned how WeWork is a SoftBank backed business that now has problems with its losses. Uber is another SoftBank backed business that now has problems with its losses. DoorDash is the current darling of the Vision Fund portfolio in SoftBank's world. I'm curious if it will suffer from a similar issue when we eventually see its numbers. That would be problematic for the Vision Fund's eventual returns. But let's move on and go back to our normal fare. Let's talk about some earlier stage stuff.